Good morning, Internet. Whenever the fuck you're listening to this, I am your host, as always, the Big Dick Daddy and the Caddy, here to bring you, hopefully, something pleasurable. That's right, it's me, Jack, and you are tuning into It Came From Tubi, the best goddamn movie podcast you can ever listen to, outside of the guys from Red Letter Media and all the other hundreds of, like, fat white dudes that have made a living. You know what? Just tune into my show. My show's free because we focus on the free streaming service Tubi. That's right. As of yet to be sponsored by them. Hey, Tubi, baby. I got cats. I got taxes. Why don't you, like, put some money on the table for me? I'll throw them up on the fucking glass for you, girl. Come on now. But until that great big payday in the sky comes from this wonderful streaming service that I have harangued movies about for, I guess, over a year now, you listening to this can go support me over on Patreon at splathousefic.com/Patreon for as little as $1 a month. If I've ever made you laugh, if I've ever made you cry, either out of your eyes or your penis, then by all means, please go throw me a buck. Every single dollar you send me goes directly into taking care of my cats or me or just whatever I do with that money that month. It would just be nice, especially since I'm fun employed currently. I would really appreciate your support, and those of you who are supporting me, there will be a little something extra waiting on you on Friday night, don't worry. With all of that said, ladies and gentlemen, I owe all of you a sincere explanation here, because the last couple of episodes of this podcast, it's been angry, and I know it's been angry, and it's been laughable at some points, and then other times it's been really sincere. I really appreciate the kind words everybody had after I did my review of The People's Joker. I think a lot of people understood where I was coming from, and I was able to enunciate my point clear enough. But I want to say, I don't like coming to this show upset. I don't like reviewing things that purposefully make me angry. I don't. And I know it equates to good audio, and a lot of you enjoy hearing me crash out about bad movies or bad choices or whatever. And I get that that's fun to listen to, but at the same time, I don't personally enjoy coming to the mic upset, all right? Because for me, the inspiration behind this podcast came from sharing time with people that I love. The movie was almost, completely irrelevant to getting to spend hours of my life with some of the most lovely people in the entire world. I truly have so many good memories watching absolute dog shit films with so many people, and that's why I started this podcast. As I've stated on B-Sky and elsewhere, the idea for It Came From Tubi came from seeing my good friend Sean and me and him getting drunk and just watching some of the worst movies known to man. It was such a wonderful time that it directly inspired me to start doing a movie review podcast because I missed talking with him about movies. I'm getting to do that at the end of this month. I'm going to be in Wisconsin from the 20th to the 30th for Adepticon, hanging out with Sean in real life and doing what's known as the Black Spine Challenge, and there's probably a pretty good chance I'm going to get a couple of recordings of both of us reviewing films as we watch them. I do want to say that we will be inebriated, and I am not bringing my studio quality mic. It's going to be on my cell phone. I will try to clean the audio up the best I can, but the point I'm trying to make is trashing films is super, super easy. It's really easy to do, especially with some of the offerings on Tubi, because it's a Tubi movie is almost spat like an insult in a lot of cases, because Tubi, being a free streaming service that is completely supported by ad-based revenue, kind of has this certain reputation. And I do want to stand up, let me defend the multi-million-dollar mega corporation for a minute. Leave them alone, right? I do want to say that even though that reputation is incredibly well earned, I think a lot of us forget that Tubi also has some, Oscar-winning dramas on it. It has some incredible movies that are on this platform. I just tend to gravitate towards the indie stuff because sometimes there's a heart, there's a humor, there's a narrative there that we don't really get with these other movies. And sure, sometimes it's a little rough and tumble and it doesn't quite make sense, and by the end of it, you're not really sure what you watched, but at least it was an experience that you didn't have before. But I told myself, well, the last 2 episodes that you have produced, you have been incredibly angry when you came to the mic. And yes, people, again, they enjoyed hearing that. But we are here to encourage people to watch films. We need to take this more seriously. We need to come with our A game. We need to be ready to talk about what we just witnessed and the art of cinema. And so that's what I decided to do this week. I decided to watch 2 movies that when I originally viewed them, both in the privacy of my own home and at the theater, I really disliked them. And I wanted to challenge myself this week. Instead of getting angry and crashing out and making all these hyperbolic jokes and statements, I wanted to talk about what about the films individually really just upset me and I didn't particularly enjoy. And so I chose 2 radically different titles this week to review. I know we're kind of getting in the vibe here, doing 2 movies instead of 3. Don't worry, when I get back, I'm going to have a shit ton of movies that I need to talk about. But we're going to begin our discussion this week with Midsommar, a film that I know quite a few of you enjoy. Midsommar is a film that centers around a bunch of college kids getting ready to do their finals and thesis statement on a very isolated cult up in the deep European mountains. There is, of course, a trappings of a drama around this film. As the film starts, we find out that our lead character, her sister has just passed away. She's pretty sure her boyfriend's cheating on her. All kinds of crazy stuff is happening, but we have to go to this all-white commune to study this thing because our grades depend on it, right? And they land off the plane, they immediately go to the commune via one of their friends who is associated with the cult, and all kinds of supernatural, spooky-ooky stuff just kind of starts to happen, and it ultimately culminates with the lead actress finding out that she is going to be the May Queen for this cult as she watches this building that contains her boyfriend, her ex-boyfriend, I should say, being a human sacrifice get burned down. Now, that is quite a setup for a movie, and at 2.5 hours long, Midsommar seems like it has a lot to say. And, in my personal opinion, with it being 2.5 hours long, I think you need to set your expectations to be paced a bit slower. This is a movie that takes a while to get its point across. And in the case of this runtime film, before we move on, I do want to say that I don't think there's any problem with the film being 2.5 to 3 hours long. I will say that I think in a lot of cases, movies that go that length could often save 10, 20 minutes, but if every single part of that film is filled with pushing the narrative forward and driving through meaning and artistic merit through the scenes, I don't think that runtimes being that long are necessarily a bad thing. I mean, hell, all of you sat in theaters to watch Avengers Endgame, and it was 3 fucking hours long, and it was just Marvel slop. But so comes my first critique of Midsommar as a film. It is, of course, produced by A24 and thus is incredibly highbrow and artistic in its execution, as many of the films by A24 tend to be. It's directed by Ari Aster, who is famous for his breakout short, There's Something About the Johnsons, a great film to watch with your dad on Father's Day. Aster is a director that is often known for his genre-pushing films that kind of skirt being a little envelope-pushing at times, like Hereditary, Eddington, Beau is Afraid, Begonia, Dream Scenario, Enemies, Munchausen, The Drama, and Death of a Unicorn. Ari Aster, as a director, is somebody that is not afraid to use a long runtime, and specifically the surreality of the plot that he's putting forward to tell a decent story. But Ari Aster also has like a 50-50 batting record so far with all of those films I've just mentioned. Specifically, I'm thinking of Eddington, Beau is Afraid, and Death of a Unicorn, all films that didn't really resonate with critics and also were commercial flops across the board in a lot of cases. Those were moments when Ari Aster, I think, was attempting to be a bit more highbrow and metaphorical than he was capable of directing at, and in exchange what we got was feeling like we were being beaten over the head with the message. However, Dream Scenario is perfect because Nicolas Cage can do absolutely no wrong. I think that this was a pattern that was first established both with Hereditary and Midsommar, which ended up being extremely highbrow artistic horror films that succeeded in various degrees. I know a lot of people place both of them in their top 10 horror movie list of all time. I'm not one of those people. When I originally got exposed to A24 films, it was just when lockdown started with COVID in North Carolina, and I could barely go anywhere. There was nothing to do, no work to be had, and I was sitting at home waiting for something to happen other than the news, which felt like sulfuric acid getting flung in my eyes every single day. However, I had a local video store that was still open. Thank goodness. And as long as I was wearing a mask, I was allowed to come in and grab whatever movies I needed to make it through that day. And I frequently did. I want to say about every Friday through Sunday, I would go in there and rent a couple of films. And the first time I went in, I ended up getting The Lighthouse, which was the first review I ever did for this series, Hereditary, and Midsommar. Now, I watched The Lighthouse, and you can even go back on Patreon and listen to my original review of it, and I think that that was an absolutely splendid film. I loved how it was executed, I loved the aesthetics of it, and to this day, it remains one of my all-time favorite horror movies. I think what it was able to accomplish was spectacular, and I did love it. And so, with a couple of beers in me, I decided to indulge myself in the more artistic endeavors of A24 and watch both Hereditary and Midsommar at the same time. I started with Hereditary, and when that eventually makes its way to Tubi, I will probably review that film as well. But Midsommar was the final film that I watched that evening. It was also the longest film out of the entire trilogy that I watched that evening by about 40 to 50 minutes. So my expectations were pretty high, especially after watching Hereditary, which is a movie that I didn't quite enjoy, but I loved the execution of it. I thought that that in of itself had merit. So I went into Midsommar with tempered expectations, and as I sat my ass on the couch and cracked open another Natty Daddy, over the next 2 hours, I found myself questioning if I was going to be able to finish it. It's not that the movie is boring. It's not. It's not that it's not beautifully shot and doesn't have a lot of practical effects that look perfect and has symbolism and meaning in it that also comes off and is executed well. It's that Hereditary, much like The People's Joker, which I reviewed over on Patreon, feels like some white people shit. And for those of you who are listening on YouTube, I'm completely unmelanated, so I take those words as you see fit, but I think what irritated me the most about Midsommar is something that I feel is a standard genre convention. When we are watching horror films, we have to suspend our disbelief slightly to work within the logic and the setting of the framework of what's going on screen in order for the narrative to be believable and be pushed forward. Let's take something like the Scream franchise, okay? We have Ghostface running around calling his victims, asking about their favorite horror movie before he goes in and stabs them. And, it turns out that our killer can be absolutely anybody. And the series has made use of the fact that we never truly know who's underneath the mask to keep the suspense high enough despite our suspension of disbelief. Because logically speaking, as somebody that consumes true crime content, like I'm sure a lot of you do as well, Ghostface might have gotten away with it if the people that he was picking off were nobodies, drifters, the kinds of people that police typically don't go looking for, right? But we suspend our disbelief that the serial killer is getting away with it targeting suburban white families, right? We suspend that disbelief because the mystery of who it could be is actually the core element of what makes Scream work. We suspend our disbelief at police incompetence and everything else that happens within that franchise because the mystery and the allure of figuring out who done it is more powerful than the logical implications of what happens on screen. You're following me right now, right? Okay, good. I hope that made sense. To further this example a bit more, let's actually use Hereditary as an example of suspending your disbelief to work within the logical framework of the narrative, okay? Hereditary is a film that centers around this cult trying to summon a demon, etc., etc., etc. So as the film goes on, immediately it plunges you headfirst into the surreality of the narrative, right? Everything feels off right from the get-go when we have these beautiful shots of this dollhouse and the grandmother trying to nurse the son and etc., etc. You immediately feel ill at ease. So as the film progresses and the more supernatural elements get introduced into it, you accept those and they make sense despite them being illogical simply because they work within the framework of the narrative. Now, there are times when your suspension of disbelief has to be so hyperbolic to work within the narrative of the film that it borders on the absurd, and I think some films pull this off way better than others. A great example of having to suspend your disbelief in order to pursue what's going on in the narrative, in my personal opinion, would be Skinamarink. Now, did I like Skinamarink? It was a deeply uncomfortable and slow film, okay? By the end of that movie, it was deeply uncomfortable, but everything that happens to those poor children within that movie makes absolute sense given what's going on, despite the fact you have to throw any logical thought processes out the window from the jump because this is a movie that is dealing with its own logic. So, Midsommar. It dwells within what I think is fair to call a sidestep from everyday reality, okay? Yes, there are supernatural elements within the film, but I think it's fair to say that it is an extremely low magic setting, okay? So, when you sit down to watch it as a casual viewer of films, you are going to assume that everything that happens on screen will be dealt with in what is more than likely an extremely logical thought process. Everything's going to make sense because this film deals with the everyday reality of being a college student having to get that thesis done. And so, as the viewer, you can accept, hey, we're all going to go hop on this plane with this guy that's our friend to go to this, again, all-white commune cult out in deep Europe to study this group of people that live as the Proto-Germanians did, right? You can accept that because that makes sense within the logical trappings of the film. You, again as a casual viewer, can accept that this cult is going to be a little weird, that they're probably going to dress a little funny, that their customs are going to be a little different, and you're shown this pretty much immediately as they descend into the village and things begin to happen around them as the people live their lives, such as their friend that pisses on the sacred tree and everybody gets angry, or they have these weird dinner customs with the giant Othala table and all this other stuff. You can accept all of this because it makes logical sense, correct? But the pivotal scene that I think asks me to suspend my disbelief of these characters operating in a logical world far too much is the scene where the elders jump off the cliff and then have their heads smashed in with a hammer. This incredibly violent event happens 30 feet from the college kids, and all but two of them just decide to stay, and the two that decide to leave get killed off screen by the cult. And what? Hold on. Pump the brakes, pump the fucking brakes, okay? You mean to tell me that I watched an old man kill himself, and then they smash his head in with a hammer? He's blood and gore all over the place, right? And I am supposed to believe that the first thought of every single one of those college kids was not, let's get on a fucking train and get the fuck out of here? What? And I know what some of you are saying already. Well, no, Jack, it makes perfectly logical sense because you have the one person that comes up and explain it's their cult's custom, and, well, the one guy had to do his thesis, and then the shitty boyfriend had to steal that guy's thesis, and the one girl was just looking for a place to belong. I get it. Okay? But for that to hold true, you have to say that all of these things, getting the thesis statement done, being lost socially and emotionally and all of this other stuff, overrode the very common human reaction of seeing a guy get his head smashed in with a hammer and immediately feeling disgust and wanting to get away from there. Now, there is an argument to be made here that these college kids were bewitched by the food that they had at the Othala table before this event happened. Sure, Okay, I can buy that, except that there was only one person that we specifically saw getting bewitched, and that was the shitty boyfriend, because the cult girl wanted to bang his brains out. The logical continuum of events within that scene, and specifically what happens afterwards, makes no sense in the reality of the film that is portrayed, which is one much like our own. That's why this movie, in my personal opinion, begins to fall off the rails, because it's almost like Ari Aster suddenly remembered he had to make a fucking horror movie. Now, metaphorically, I understand that this illustrates that there was no escape for these kids at all, and that ultimately they were coming to this cult to meet their death, and almost all of them do, except our lovely lead female character. And yes, I can buy into the fact that perhaps our lead character was already, air quotes, chosen by the nature spirit, specifically Yemmer, at the very start of the film, as she begins to hallucinate and she sees grass growing out of her hands, thus implicating that she was going to become a part of the village. Again, totally get it, totally makes sense. But then the film suddenly shifts gears back into being this hardcore academic drama about all these social connections that these college kids have, and two of their friends are just straight up fucking missing and they don't notice for a little bit. What? The two people that freaked the fuck out were like, we're getting the fuck out of here. You just are so overcome with concern for your thesis that you completely ignore the fact that what the fuck? All the while, the supernatural elements of this film keep kind of starting to poke out in very subtle ways. There's ghosts, there's the green man in the foreground behind one of them, and all of these different things keep on occurring. But the surreality of what's going on with these college kids is almost, in my personal opinion, completely blotted out by the fact that they are acting like no fucking human being has ever acted in the face of absolute violence. You just watched some people get put down like a sick animal, and your first reaction is not a very natural amount of shock and perhaps trauma. But fuck, I gotta get back to my thesis statement. Hey, has anybody seen those two, by the way? Never mind, my thesis statement's more important. And this is something that really only confounded me more on my second viewing of this film for the podcast this week. It's something that, personally speaking, I know perhaps it's a bit egotistical to say, but in such a setting, the fuck, I wouldn't stick around. I would have got on the fucking train or gotten anywhere. That you can walk. You don't have to rely on the cult for transportation like those two kids that got killed off screen. You can just walk. You have free will. And thus, the suspension of disbelief necessary to make this film make sense requires that you, the viewer, inherently assume that all of them got bewitched at that dinner at the Othala table before the elders were killed. And I don't buy that, and I'm going to tell you why. Midsommar does have high metaphor and subtle meaning throughout it, but it's also a film that talks down to the audience like you're illiterate. At the very start of the film, we see this 4-panel mural that literally tells you everything that's going to go on in the film. Later in the film, we see another painting or mural that talks about the boyfriend getting bewitched and how he's going to get bewitched. For a film that goes out of its way to tell you directly what is going to happen, so long as you have eyes to see and are watching the film, it sure does love to fuck with your understanding of logical events. And it's not just those giant murals literally telling you what's going to happen that pervade the film. There's multiple times pieces of artwork, Proto-Germanic rune staves, and more are all throughout this movie, literally telling you what's happening on screen or what's about to happen. It's not a film that is especially clever. It's a movie that a lot of people kin to because it holds their hand and tells them exactly everything that's happening on screen. If you've ever been outraged because a character specifically looked at the camera and said, "Well, I'm about to go," details every part of the scene, you should hold that same energy for Midsommar. It's not a movie that thinks you're smart. It's a movie that thinks you're fucking stupid. And I think that bleeds over into the obvious feminist reading that websites like Jezebel and other websites took to with this film. They viewed it as an empowering story of a woman overcoming different strifes going on in their life and etc., etc. I find that to be a very disingenuous and insulting read to the female audience. Now, I understand white masculine guy talking about feminism seems incredibly performative, but here's exactly what I mean by it's disingenuous and insulting. It is a film where the feminist message that people get out of it essentially centers around do nothing and allow yourself to be entrapped. Allow yourself to be robbed of your own agency and your ability to make a choice. Now, obviously, I can't speak for all women, or any women, really, but the ladies in my life that have chosen to share their time with me, I value their independence. I value their ability to share their own thoughts, opinions, and feelings, even if they disagree with me or their actions go against something that I personally agree with. That, to me, is feminism. Agency. Having your own autonomy, having control of your choices, of your own body. So I find it wildly weird as hell that people got a feminist read out of Hereditary when, again, the film culminates with our female lead being indoctrinated into a fucking cult. So to round out this review, I think Midsommar is a film that would have been saved by actually cutting down on the runtime. Not only would it have saved on the speed of the film, which I will say the pacing's fine, it does its job admirably, but it would have kept things going in a much more logical procession, and perhaps kept Ari Aster on the fact that he is producing a dramatic horror film, and not necessarily an episode of Scooby-Doo where people get killed. But if Ari Aster was simply trying to achieve art for art's sake, well, here it is all these years later, and I'm talking about it on a podcast. Congrats to that. You did, in fact, make me feel something. Let's move on to our next film. Now, on the diametrically opposite side of this kind of artistic portrayal, a film that I have ragged on since the day I went to the theater to see it. Jennifer's Body. Jennifer's Body is a 2009 comedy horror film that was basically a vehicle for Megan Fox to get in front of more eyes and faces as she was starting to build her career. It centers around Needy and, of course, Jennifer, our titular character, who go to a bar in the middle of the night despite all common sense. Jennifer gets kidnapped by a band and gets turned into a blood-crazy succubus that proceeds to go through and rip apart all the men in town and everything else, and it culminates with both of these characters resolving their conflict at the end of the film in, I would say, a very Buffy the Vampire Slayer kind of fashion. When I originally saw this film, I was 19 years old, Megan Fox was the hot it girl, and I decided to go with my buddies to the theater to see it because there was actually just nothing else on that weekend. We used to go to the theater every single weekend, and we always tried to hit up every single horror movie that came out, regardless of how good it was. We only walked out a couple of times, one of them being the werewolf movie with Anthony Hopkins in it, which was so bad we walked out like 30 minutes in. But we sat there through the entirety of Jennifer's Body, and I remember walking away and immediately disliking the film. And I understood inherently at the time that I was not the target audience for this movie. I had gone in just a horny teenage boy expecting to see Megan Fox shake her booty and maybe spill some blood, and I walked away incredibly disappointed that there was no booty shots. There was a really long shot of her feet, though. Like a really long shot of her feet. And so, disappointed and blue-balled, I told myself, well, it was just a bad horror movie, don't worry about it. As the years went on, Jennifer's Body became a cult hit, and that absolutely fucking confounded me. And I didn't understand how so many people would clamor for what, in my personal opinion, was a very subpar vehicle for what, at the time, was an overglorified Instagram model. I think my rage at this film and its weird popularity culminated when the official Bratz doll, yes, the Bratz company, the people that make the Bratz doll, released a GIF where two of their characters were reenacting the scene kind of right after Jennifer gets assaulted, where she's lighting her tongue on fire and talking about boys, and they released this like small little animatic for some line that they were launching or something. I don't know. And I remember I saw that and I was like, you've got to be fucking kidding me, dude. It was not that good. I felt like the loudest inmate in the asylum when it came to this movie because it just sucked. And I refused to watch it again. People would bring it up about how it was one of their favorite movies, and I would kind of like bite my cheek and keep my thoughts to myself. But here we are, and I needed something to review for this week. And what do I see when I pull up Tubi except Jennifer's Body, this freaking movie that I have not seen in almost 20 years. And I decided, what the fuck? Let's do it. That's kind of the theme for this week. Let's watch it. And this is a weirdly Bush era film. Like I'm not even fucking around. It is such a film that only could have existed during the aftermath of George W. Bush. And what I mean by that is there's constantly these weird references to 9/11. Like, the movie will not let you forget that 9/11 happened. And it's everything from things that the characters say to the theme of the shots at the bar. And that, along with it, brings in a lot of just overt casual racism that drops at the time. Like Jennifer charging in Needy's house and being like, it smells like Thai food in here. Have you guys been fucking? Or her referring to the foreign exchange student as she's always wanted to taste cucumber because he's uncircumcised. And along with the racism and the queer phobia and everything else that's present in this movie, there's just a lot of hyper cynical actions from the characters that don't make any fucking sense. After the bar explodes, Needy and Jennifer are sitting outside, and Needy is doing everything she can to try and bring Jennifer back down and bring her into a logical, space where she's got her head on despite this horrible thing that just happened. And it becomes increasingly obvious that Jennifer has taken some kind of drug, perhaps, as it's implied but never explicitly stated, Rufinol, okay? So here comes the super creepy rape-coated lead singer of the band that they just watched, Low Shoulder, and he comes over. He has a beer in his hand. He is completely clean. There's nothing wrong with him. He looks like he didn't even enter the fire, right? And he's like, oh, geez, that was really bad. Hey, you should come in my super creepy, like, rape van that has no windows, right? And Needy just lets Jennifer go. She doesn't jump on this man and start beating the fuck out of him with her shoes. She doesn't slap the dude. She doesn't just grab Jennifer and start walking off. Nope. She just lets her get in the van. And I understand that they have this incredibly toxic friendship where there's all this competition with Jennifer and stuff like that. But going back to that suspension of disbelief required, I don't care how bad your relationship is with a friend. If you see somebody that has very obvious implications of sexual assault trying to get them to come with them somewhere, what would you not do to stop that from happening? What would you not bring yourself to do to keep them safe? And Needy just lets her get in the fucking van. And so that makes no fucking sense. And then she goes home, and instead of like calling the cops, right, or calling emergency services, the bar is still fucking on fire. Okay, the bar is burning down. There's probably people trapped inside. Who does she call? Except Neil from Scott Pilgrim to be like, wow, this happened. This kind of sucks. I'm pretty sure Jennifer's getting assaulted right now. And Neil is just like, wow, that really sucks. Hey, you should come over and we should talk about it, right? What the fuck? Like, what the hell? And then this is immediately followed by Jennifer coming to Needy's house covered in blood. Covered in it. Just covered in it. Tweak it out. Goes to the fridge. Rips the fucking door open. Immediately starts just chowing down on a Boston Market rotisserie chicken, okay? And again, by the time Needy reaches her cell phone, Jennifer comes and pins her against the wall and, queer baits as this movie does throughout the entire runtime. And the girl drops her phone and Jennifer leaves. You don't pick up the fucking phone and, I don't know, make a phone call to somebody that can help you out? Emergency services, cops, any of this? No, we're gonna fuck off and go to school the next morning? Really? Once again, I felt like the loudest inmate in the asylum. I felt like I was losing my mind because here it is almost 2 decades later and this movie is still a cult hit. And so I was talking about it with my friends. I was like, what am I missing? What made this film so beloved amongst a certain group of people? I feel like I'm missing something. I get that I'm not the target audience for this movie, but that's beside the point. Like, there's gotta be something I'm not understanding. And I like to think of myself as a logical and, reasonably smart idiot, but I knew that there was a piece to this that I was not getting. And so, one of the most beautiful women that I hang out with all the time, who is as intelligent as she is gorgeous, decided to gracefully give me some of her time and explain her perspective on the film. I would like to read all of that in full for you right now. And to the person that helped me with this, thank you. You were so patient and you didn't have to do that for me, but I really appreciate that you did. It definitely enhanced my understanding of the film tenfold. First, Jennifer's Body came out at the end of the 2000s, 2009 to be exact. It flopped spectacularly. They had trailers that heavily implied that this was a standard vampire slasher where you get to see Megan Fox's boobs and then didn't deliver. Correct. That was one of the reasons I went to go see this movie. The writer was trying to make a horror movie about the social horrors of a small-town culture and the horrors of friendship made out of necessity and proximity. It became a cult classic due to queer appreciation. The director and the writer themselves didn't realize this movie heavily reflects the queer bi experience, which many femme-presenting girls have in their small communities. It's a uniquely queer femme depiction on full display via the tropes of vampire curses and TV-mandated supposed rainbows and butterflies, bubblegum friendship that all girls are supposed to have. You are not supposed to like these characters. I want you to remember that part of what they just said. I'll be expanding upon that in a moment. Not a single one of them. They represent every smash-down, toxic, horny impulse a teen pushes down in order to hopefully fit in and not stick out so they don't end up isolated and shunned like the poor exchange student by people like the girl calling the main character lesbigay at the beginning of the film for simply waving at her friend. That also includes the open racism you pointed out. Trouble is that while the director ended up making this, they were thinking of how many people view Juno. They themselves didn't understand that what they made because they think they're Jennifer in the story and think others will do the same in spite of the movie literally being from a main character's perspective. No one normal is looking at Juno as a role model, and no one is looking at Jennifer and thinking she's the most relatable character in the room. But when you read or see interviews by the director, that's clearly how they viewed it. Cody Diablo, in terms of being a director, is like that friend that can make bomb-ass mac and cheese when they're drunk, but doesn't even know how to boil water when they're sober. This was an incredible read of this film, and it suddenly made a lot more sense to me personally what Jennifer's Body was actually about. And it was that Cody Diablo, as ambitious as I'm sure she is in her filmmaking, which I have thoughts about her as well, they didn't understand what they were making, and they accidentally made a cult classic queer horror film. Now, as somebody that is definitely a part of that beautiful rainbow flag myself, I think that that's why I didn't understand this film either when I initially saw it or on my rewatch, because it was a queer perspective that I myself lacked. Now, that said, do I think it's a good movie? No, some of the jokes do get me, and there are times when the cynical nature of the film and how it portrays Americana and these small communities in the wake of tragedies does come across as funny, but it's cynical in a way that people still kind of laugh at Rick and Morty but don't actively think about it. It's a cynicalism that is severely dated by today's standards, and as often as we talk about you couldn't make XYZ film or show again, I definitely think that Jennifer's Body is encapsulated with the cynicism and the horrific attitude that most of us had of the early 2000s. I think it's the perfect cap-off point for horror at the time, too. Meaning, it's a dumb movie with dumb characters in it and a dumb plot, but somehow, some way, it accidentally fails its way up into having a meaning that was not explicitly there either by the writer, the director, or the actors. It finds success purely through hindsight, not necessarily because that was its intention. And for that reason, I still don't like Jennifer's Body, but I finally understand why people do, and it was well worth my time to rewatch this film and try to understand what it was getting across. Well, everybody, this has been It Came From Tubi, or whatever words are. I've been your host, as always, Jack. I really hope you enjoyed the episode. Hey, if you're listening on YouTube, give me a thumbs up. Subscribe if you like. I do a lot of stuff. I talk about movies. I do readings and narrations. And if you're over there on Patreon, again, patreon.com/splathousefic, hey, I appreciate your support so much. And if you'd like to see the other stuff I'm about, I got years worth of content over on Patreon. Take care, everybody, and have a good one. Go watch something.